You're giving our home to her? After everything we built? It's already decided. The papers are signed.
Kaylin froze in the middle of her own living room. The place she once decorated with joy, the place she once believed would hold her future. But today, it felt foreign, too quiet, too cold, too unfamiliar. Not because of the furniture or the walls, but because of the woman standing in the doorway, tapping her manicured nails against a gold bracelet engraved with two initials, A.S., Aubrey Sloan. Aubrey looked around with a slow sweep of confidence, her heels clicking softly on the hardwood floor, as if she'd practiced entering rooms that didn't belong to her. She smiled, not warmly, not politely, just enough to show she believed she'd already won. "You need to move out by the end of the week," she said, her voice smooth but sharp. "Rowan wants me here now." For a moment, Kaylin didn't breathe. This was her home, her marriage, her life. Yet she stood there being told to walk away, as if she were just a guest who'd overstayed her welcome. Her stomach tightened, heat rising to her face as Aubrey rested one hand on the counter, causing the bracelet to slide down her wrist. The same bracelet Kaylin found in Rowan's car weeks ago, the one she prayed had an explanation. There wasn't. The truth stood right in front of her. Smirking, Kaylin's throat tightened. "You're in my house." Aubrey shrugged lightly. "He said it works better if I get settled sooner rather than later. Hope you've started packing." Before Kaylin could speak again, her mind replayed the moment from that morning, barely hours ago, when Rowan walked into the kitchen looking like he'd made a decision he didn't plan to discuss. She remembered the coldness in his voice, the stiffness in his stance, the stack of papers he dropped onto the counter without warning. Divorce papers. He didn't sit down. He didn't offer a conversation. He didn't acknowledge the confusion in her eyes. He simply slid the documents toward her and said, "It's time we go separate ways, Kaylin." Her breath had caught in her chest. Separate ways? "Rowan, what is this? Where is this coming from?" He didn't flinch. "I'm seeing someone." Her heart had cracked instantly, but she forced her voice to stay steady. "Someone?" "Aubrey," he said plainly. "She fits my life better than you ever did." The words hadn't just hurt, they sliced, because they came from the man who once claimed she grounded him. The man who said she softened the hardness he carried inside. The man who promised she would never feel out of place by his side. Now he was choosing someone else and telling her to give up the home they built together. A home she filled with memories he no longer wanted. Back in the present, Aubrey tilted her head with a small grin, as if she'd waited for Kaylin to break. Kaylin did not. She lifted her chin, even though her chest felt heavy. "He didn't tell me you'd be walking into the house today." Aubrey shrugged. "He doesn't owe you updates anymore." That sentence hit like a blow. Kaylin's hands curled at her sides, not in anger, but to steady herself. Her eyes drifted around the living room. Photographs still on the shelves, her throw blanket still hanging over the couch, the scent of the candles she liked still filling the air. This was her space, her life, her heart, and yet she was being pushed out by someone who hadn't contributed to any of it. Aubrey's voice broke the silence. "Don't take this personally. Rowan and I are just aligned." Aligned, as if love were a business contract, and Kaylin was the one who failed to meet corporate standards. Kaylin's pulse pounded in her ears, but she refused to give Aubrey the satisfaction of seeing her break. She gathered her breath and steadied her voice. "You're here early. You could have waited until I left." Aubrey smirked. "I didn't want to waste time. You know how it is." Kaylin didn't respond. There was nothing to say to someone who entered another woman's home, claiming ownership of something she didn't build. Aubrey stepped past her, examining the dining table Kaylin chose the month they married. She touched the back of a chair like she already owned it. "So, like I said," Aubrey continued casually, "end of the week. Rowan wants this transition smooth." Transition. Home was now a transition. Marriage was now an inconvenience. Kaylin swallowed hard, forcing herself to breathe through the storm rising inside her. She would not fall apart in front of this woman. She wouldn't give Rowan that satisfaction either. She took one step back, lifting her chin. "This conversation ends here." Aubrey raised an eyebrow. "You sure? We could—" "I said," Kaylin repeated quietly but firmly, "it ends here." With that, she walked out of the living room with the remnants of her dignity held tightly in her grip. Her heart ached, her chest burned, but her spine stayed straight. Behind her, Aubrey's smirk lingered, strong enough to show she believed she had already replaced Kaylin completely. But the story was far from over, and Rowan had no idea how much his decision would cost him. Bestie. Before we go any further, let me ask you, and everyone listening, something real. Have you ever poured yourself into someone with everything you had, only to learn they were handing the best parts of you to someone who never earned it? Have you ever tried to hold a home together while the person you loved acted like you were just a temporary guest? Have you ever stayed loyal to someone who treated your loyalty like a weakness? Because that's where Kaylin stood, in her living room, in the place she once filled with laughter, warmth, and hope, facing a woman wearing her husband's attention like a trophy. Some of us know that feeling too well. You give love honestly, you give support freely, you try to believe in someone even when they stop believing in you. But they drift. They grow distant. They start choosing ease over commitment. They look everywhere except at the heart that stood beside them. And suddenly, the person who promised forever becomes a stranger, holding decisions that break you in one move. Tell me, bestie, have you ever held on to someone long after they let go of you? Have you ever convinced yourself it was just stress, just work, just a phase, when the truth was sitting right in front of you the whole time? Kaylin did everything right. She loved, she supported, she showed up, she built a life brick by brick with a man she believed saw her value. But loyalty cannot hold a marriage together when the other person is already choosing someone else behind closed doors. Have you ever found something, an item, a text, a clue, and your heart knew exactly what it meant before your mind accepted it? That was Kaylin, with the bracelet, those initials, that floral scent on Rowan's collar. The emotional distance she kept pretending wasn't real. She stayed loyal. She stayed present. She stayed hopeful. But sometimes hope hurts more than the truth. So ask yourself, have you ever given someone your whole heart only to realize they were using it to patch holes in someone else's ego? Have you ever been so committed to a relationship that you didn't see how close you were to disappearing inside it? Because Kaylin wasn't just losing a home. She wasn't just losing a husband. She was losing the version of herself she carried into that marriage. The woman who believed love was stronger than someone's personal ambition. And if you've ever been there, bestie, you know the pain hits long before the breakup happens. This part of her story isn't just about heartbreak, it's about recognition. Recognition of the moment you stop lying to yourself. Recognition of the moment you ask, how did I get here? Recognition of the moment someone tries to walk over you, believing you won't stand up. Kaylin didn't know it then, but her strength was already forming, not because she wanted it, but because betrayal forces a woman to remember who she really is. And if you've ever been pushed into rediscovering your own strength, you understand her more than she even understands herself right now. Let's speak plainly for a moment, bestie. A woman can endure stress. A woman can endure uncertainty. A woman can even endure seasons of distance with someone she loves. But disrespect, that is where the line must be drawn. And what Kaylin faced wasn't just disrespect. It was a blow straight to her dignity. Think about it. She wasn't dealing with a simple argument. She wasn't dealing with miscommunication. She wasn't dealing with a marriage going through a rough patch. She was watching another woman walk into her home with confidence, wearing a bracelet she didn't buy, carrying a relationship she didn't build, acting as though Kaylin's entire life could be cleared out by the end of the week. That's not just betrayal. That's humiliation. That's someone trying to erase you while you're still standing in the room. And the worst part? It wasn't just Aubrey. It was Rowan, the man she trusted more than anyone. Rowan wasn't confused. He wasn't lost. He wasn't unsure of what he wanted. He made a choice, a deliberate, calculated choice. He chose to hand his loyalty to someone who fed his ego over someone who nurtured his growth. He chose attention over the woman who grounded him. He chose convenience over commitment. And when he looked Kaylin in the eye and said, "She fits my life better than you ever did," he wasn't just ending a marriage. He was trying to redefine her worth. That cuts deep. Because no matter how strong a woman is, hearing the person you built a life with dismiss your presence like you were never enough, that pain stays with you. Some of you listening right now know exactly what that feels like. To give love, with honesty, to build with intention, to sacrifice quietly for someone who never understood the weight of your effort, only for them to treat you like an option. So let's call it what it is. A woman can survive heartbreak. She can even rise from abandonment. But disrespect shakes her core, because disrespect says, you don't matter here. You're replaceable. Your effort meant nothing. In that living room, Kaylin wasn't standing in confusion. She was standing in a moment that told her everything she tried to deny. She wasn't losing Rowan. She was losing the illusion of who Rowan pretended to be, and that realization stings more than the breakup itself. This is the emotional wound. It's not that he left, it's how he left. It's why he left. It's who he became while leaving. Kaylin deserved honesty. She deserved gratitude. She deserved respect. Instead, Rowan handed her eviction from her own life without a hint of remorse. Bestie. When a woman reaches that point, when she stands in the middle of the pain with nothing but her integrity holding her up, the world shifts for her. Because that's when strength begins. Not when she fights. Not when she argues. Not when she begs. But when she finally understands. This disrespect is where I stop breaking myself to make someone else comfortable. And that is exactly where Kaylin is standing now. Right at the edge of the life she once knew, facing the truth she can't unsee. Bestie, stay with me, because this is where the story starts turning in ways nobody, not even Rowan, saw coming. Right now, all Kaylin sees is the loss. The marriage collapsing, the home slipping from her grasp, the woman in her living room, acting like she holds the deed to Kaylin's entire life. But life has a way of flipping tables when people least expect it. So let me ask you something. Have you ever watched someone treat you like you were easy to discard, only for life to circle back and show them exactly what they threw away? Have you ever been pushed out of a space you built with your bare hands, only to discover later that you never truly belonged there because something better was waiting? Because that's where this story is headed. Rowan believed he was choosing an upgrade. He believed he was stepping into a life more aligned with his image. He believed he could push Kaylin aside and step forward without consequence. But bestie, let me tell you this gently. Life does not reward dishonor. And the same door he forced her out of, the one he thought would open to comfort, ease, and admiration, is the same door that's going to show him everything he misjudged. Kaylin is walking into a chapter she didn't plan for, but she is not walking into failure. She is walking into clarity, because when betrayal hits this hard, it doesn't break you permanently. It breaks you open. And through that opening, truth walks in. Truth about who she is. Truth about what she deserves. Truth about the life she was meant to build outside of someone else's shadow. Rowan has no idea what's coming. He thinks he won. He thinks replacing his wife with a woman who feeds his ego will bring him peace. But the deeper this story goes, the more he'll realize he didn't just lose a partner, he lost the foundation that kept him steady. Meanwhile, Kaylin is about to step into connections, opportunities, and a level of strength she never thought she had. That's the twist I want you to hold on to. Because betrayal is loud, but transformation is louder. And before this story ends, Rowan will face something he never expected. Regret. Not the casual kind, not the soft kind, but the kind that hits harder when he sees Kaylin rise into a life he never imagined she'd grow strong enough to claim. So stay with me, because everything you just witnessed, the coldness, the dismissal, the humiliation, it's only the setup. This story shifts, not for Rowan, not for Aubrey, but for the woman who walked out with nothing except dignity, and comes back with everything she earned. Bestie, the twist waiting for Rowan? He created it himself. Kaylin stood near the doorway as Aubrey moved deeper into the living room, touching items that didn't belong to her, acting as if she had earned the right to place judgment on a life she never lived. Aubrey paused beside the large framed photo taken on Kaylin and Rowan's first anniversary, the two of them smiling by Lake Michigan with their coats wrapped tight against the Chicago breeze. It was a moment filled with love, one Kaylin believed would set the tone for every year after. Aubrey traced the edge of the frame with her finger. "I'll take this down later," she said casually. "Rowan and I want the space to reflect us." Kaylin's heart jolted. Not because Aubrey touched the frame, but because of the quiet boldness in her tone. A tone that carried certainty. A tone that said she believed she belonged here more than Kaylin ever did. "We," Kaylin repeated under her breath. Aubrey didn't look back. Yes, he wants a new energy in the house. One that aligns with him. The word aligns felt like a slap. Kaylin wasn't perfect, but she never pretended to be anything other than what she was. Real, loving, grounded. Aubrey continued walking through the space, tapping her bracelet against tables, countertops, surfaces, letting those initials catch the light like a trophy. A.S. The reminder stung each time it flashed. Kaylin finally found her voice. "You don't get to rewrite a history you weren't here to build." Aubrey smirked. "You call it history. Rowan calls it a phase." The words scraped across Kaylin's chest, but she didn't fall apart. She held herself steady, even as everything inside felt like it was sinking. And just when she thought the pain couldn't cut any deeper, her memory replayed the moment Rowan spoke those final words to her hours earlier. She remembered how he stood on the other side of the counter. Not a hint of hesitation in his voice, not a flicker of empathy in his face. "She fits my life better than you ever did." It replayed in her mind like a sentence meant to break her twice. He said it without tremor, without softness, without the man she once knew behind his eyes. Those words could have shattered anyone, but something unexpected happened. In that moment, the one replaying inside her chest right now, a part of Kaylin woke up. It wasn't anger. It wasn't rage. It wasn't even heartbreak. It was clarity, because someone who can look you in the face and speak to you like you were a misplaced detail in their biography was never meant to carry your future anyway. Back in the present, Aubrey turned, finally meeting Kaylin's eyes with a smug stillness. "You'll be fine," she said lightly. "People rebuild." Kaylin didn't answer. She didn't argue. She didn't crumble. She stepped back, letting the air settle around her like she was taking the first breath of a woman stepping out of a life that no longer honored her. This wasn't her ending. This was the moment she learned exactly who she couldn't stay with. Bestie. Before we move deeper into this story, please like this video and drop a comment. It genuinely helps YouTube push our stories to more people who need these messages. Your support keeps this channel thriving. Kaylin Pierce grew up on the south side of Chicago, in a neighborhood where people shared more than walls. They shared life. Her childhood wasn't wrapped in wealth, but it was filled with warmth in ways money couldn't imitate. Her mother, Marlene, worked 2 nursing shifts most days, coming home long after sunset but still managing to ask Kaylin about her homework, her dreams, and the little moments that made her smile. Their apartment wasn't large, but it felt alive. Neighbors stopping by with leftover food, the sound of kids playing outside, aunties laughing during weekend cookouts, and the comfort of knowing someone always had your back. That environment shaped Kaylin. It taught her community over competition. It taught her that success meant lifting others as you rose. It taught her that love wasn't measured by what you could buy, but by how you showed up. When Kaylin earned her acceptance letter to Howard University, her entire block celebrated as if she'd won a championship. Howard wasn't just a school to her. It was a doorway, a place where she refined her voice, sharpened her confidence, and discovered how powerful representation truly was. She majored in technology development, determined to create systems that gave marginalized youth better access to tech opportunities. At Howard, she wasn't just a student. She became a mentor, a tutor, a support system to younger girls adjusting to campus life. She never forgot where she came from, and she carried her Chicago grit with pride. After graduation, Kaylin moved back closer to home while working remotely on tech-based nonprofit projects. She spent late nights designing educational programs and early mornings speaking at youth events. Her life wasn't glamorous, but it was full, rooted, purposeful, loved. Every Sunday, she called her mother before making a simple dinner of baked chicken or pasta. Every holiday, she returned home with gifts she couldn't always afford, but gave anyway. She dropped by community centers to offer free workshops, reminding kids who looked like her that they belonged in spaces people told them were out of reach. To the outside world, she wasn't a headline, but to the people who mattered, she was a light. Kaylin moved through life grounded. The type of grounded that comes from growing up in a place where neighbors turned into family, and every setback came with someone reminding you to keep going. That same grounding is what would later win Rowan Ellis's attention. He came from a world far removed from hers, but it was her steadiness, her softness mixed with strength, that captivated him long before he knew it would change his life. But Kaylin didn't know then that the very qualities that pulled him in would one day be the ones he claimed no longer suited him. For now, she was simply a young woman living with purpose, deeply connected to her roots, carrying a heart that never learned how to love halfway. She was ready for life to unfold. She was not ready for what love would demand from her next. While Kaylin grew up surrounded by community spirit and shared strength, Rowan Ellis was raised in an entirely different landscape, one shaped by influence, legacy, and polished expectations. Rowan came from a long line of real estate magnates based in Connecticut. The Ellis family wasn't just wealthy, they were respected in circles where money opened doors before a handshake was even offered. Their name appeared on charity buildings, luxury development projects, and the guest lists of events where connections mattered more than sincerity. His childhood existed inside large homes with vaulted ceilings, private tutors, chauffeurs, and vacations that looked more like business networking opportunities than family bonding. His father, a stern man who believed feelings slowed progress, groomed Rowan to lead Ellis development from the time he was old enough to hold a pen. Success wasn't optional for Rowan, it was expected. He attended elite boarding schools where students discussed business futures before they even learned to drive. His friendships were built around mutual benefit. His routine centered on preparing him to inherit responsibility, rather than allowing him to explore who he truly wanted to be. And while he excelled in everything handed to him, academics, leadership roles, public presence, there was always a quiet disconnect in his chest. He knew how to present confidence, how to negotiate, how to impress a boardroom, but he struggled with emotional depth, not because he lacked the capacity, but because no one ever encouraged him to express it. By the time he entered adulthood, Rowan was the kind of man who moved with certainty and carried authority effortlessly. He took over major projects for the family company, expanded their portfolio across several states, and became known in business circles as someone who executed decisions quickly and cleanly. People admired him, people respected him, people trusted his leadership, but rarely did anyone know him. He was used to admiration without intimacy, partnerships without emotional truth, and relationships that served appearances rather than personal fulfillment. And yet, for all his privilege and access, Rowan often felt disconnected from the world around him. A man surrounded by plenty but lacking grounding. That emptiness is what made Kaylin stand out the night they met. She wasn't impressed by his last name. She didn't adjust her tone because of his position. She didn't treat him like a prize or an opportunity. She spoke to him like a human being, something he had experienced less than people assumed. Rowan was drawn to her authenticity, her passion for community work, and the way she could speak about real-life impact without needing validation from anyone in the room. She didn't chase his attention. She didn't flatter him. She simply existed as herself, steady, insightful, warm. And for the first time in a long time, Rowan felt seen, not as an Ellis, not as a young executive, not as someone carrying a legacy, but as Rowan. He didn't realize then that the very grounding he admired in her would one day be the same grounding he rejected, not because it lacked value, but because he hadn't yet learned how to handle a love that required vulnerability instead of performance. Their worlds were opposites, one built on community, the other on image. But destiny has a way of crossing paths that shouldn't intersect. Soon, those paths would intertwine in ways neither of them could have predicted. It was a warm evening in Atlanta when Kaylin and Rowan's paths crossed for the first time. The city buzzed with its usual energy, but inside the downtown event hall, a different kind of electricity filled the air. The fundraiser brought together young professionals, community leaders, and influential sponsors, all gathered to support initiatives aimed at expanding tech access for underserved youth. Kaylin had been invited as a featured speaker. She wasn't the type to seek spotlight, but her work spoke for her. Her programs helped students in overlooked neighborhoods gain hands-on experience, and her passion for change had earned her recognition from key organizations. She arrived wearing a simple but elegant dress, her hair pulled back neatly, her demeanor calm yet confident. She wasn't there to impress. She was there to represent the communities that shaped her. Across the room, Rowan entered surrounded by board members and company executives. He carried the polished confidence of a man used to commanding attention without asking for it. His suit was tailored, his posture perfect, and every handshake he gave was met with admiration. But even in a crowd designed to flatter him, he couldn't focus. Not once Kaylin stepped onto the stage. The moment she began speaking, the room shifted. Her voice wasn't loud, it was clear. Her presence wasn't commanding, it was steady. She didn't talk numbers or projections like the speakers before her. She talked about children finding hope through opportunity, about creating pathways instead of excuses, about the responsibility of those with influence to uplift those without. She wasn't rehearsed. She was real. Rowan felt something unsteady in his chest, something he hadn't felt in years. She spoke with conviction, honesty, and sincerity in a room full of polished personas and rehearsed smiles. When she stepped off the stage, she wasn't swarmed by admirers. She greeted people humbly, accepting compliments with grace but without arrogance. Rowan found himself moving toward her, not because it was strategic, but because something about her drew him in before his mind even understood why. "Your speech," he began, stopping just a few feet away, "was unlike anything I usually hear at events like this." Kaylin turned to him, not intimidated by his presence. "Is that good or bad?" He cracked a small smile, one that looked unfamiliar on him, even to himself. "Better, much better." "You spoke with belief, not performance." Kaylin chuckled softly. "I don't know how to talk any other way. Children don't benefit from corporate jargon. They benefit from real action." Her answer wasn't crafted to impress him. It was simply the truth. Rowan extended his hand. "I'm Rowan Ellis." "I know," she said politely, shaking his hand. "Your company helped sponsor the program." He nodded. "Yes, but hearing you speak makes me realize there's more we could be doing." They fell into a natural conversation, the kind that didn't feel forced or rushed. Kaylin shared stories from the community, and Rowan listened, truly listened, as if he hadn't been given honest perspective in years. She noticed his polished demeanor, but saw something deeper beneath it, a man searching for meaning beyond corporate achievements. He noticed her warmth, her intelligence, her strength. She didn't shrink around him or defer to his status. She treated him with the same respect she gave every person in the room. Hours slipped by without them realizing. By the time the event ended, they had exchanged numbers, a simple gesture, but one that carried weight neither of them admitted immediately. From that night on, they were no longer from separate worlds. Something had begun. Something sincere, unexpected, and undeniably powerful. Soon, everyone around them would talk about their connection, as if it were made of luck. But the truth? It was built from authenticity meeting admiration for the first time in both their lives. Kaylin never believed in fairy tales, but the early days of her marriage to Rowan felt close to one. Not because everything was perfect, but because both of them were trying, genuinely trying, to build something real. After a year of dating, they married in an intimate ceremony near Lake Michigan. Rowan insisted on a breathtaking venue overlooking the water, but Kaylin added warmth to every detail: handwritten vows, a small choir from a community center she volunteered with, and a reception where her mother danced until she laughed herself breathless. Rowan had looked at Kaylin that day, as if he finally understood what it meant to feel at home. He bought them a contemporary house just outside of Chicago, a place filled with light, open spaces, and the promise of new beginnings. Kaylin decorated it with touches from her culture, gifts from her neighborhood back home, and artwork created by emerging Black artists she admired. She wanted their home to reflect not just beauty, but meaning. Rowan didn't object. In fact, he praised her for it. "I never knew color could feel warm like this," he once told her, running his fingers over a quilt her grandmother made. "My life always looked good, but it rarely felt like anything." She laughed softly and nudged him. "That's what happens when you focus on looks instead of heart." He held her close, whispering, "You're teaching me." In those early months, they built routines that made their connection stronger. They cooked together, Rowan learning how to season food the way Kaylin's mother taught her. They took walks near the lake, talking about dreams, fears, childhood memories. They spent late nights sharing goals, from Rowan wanting to expand affordable housing units to Kaylin planning new tech programs for underrepresented youth. There was balance. There was joy. There was partnership. When Rowan came home from tough board meetings, Kaylin was his calm. When Kaylin faced obstacles in her community initiatives, Rowan became her strategist, helping her navigate logistics she'd never dealt with before. They laughed often. They held hands effortlessly. They spoke openly, even when it was hard. People around them admired their energy. A man raised in prestige and a woman molded by community strength, coming together in a way that felt refreshing and genuine. For a while, Rowan's world softened. He wasn't constantly trying to impress anyone. He wasn't striving for image. He wasn't hard to reach emotionally. They planned vacations, talked about future children, shared long dinners without checking phones. There were moments when Rowan looked at Kaylin with an expression she'd never forget, gentler than anything he showed publicly, full of gratitude he didn't know how to put into words. Their home felt alive. The kind of alive Rowan never experienced growing up. The kind of alive Kaylin cherished deeply. But life doesn't always stay where it starts. The shift began slowly, so slowly that Kaylin didn't recognize it at first. Longer meetings, more business trips, fewer shared dinners, conversations cut short by new obligations. Still, she tried to hold on to the love they built. She tried to remind him of what they promised. She tried to believe they were just adjusting to new responsibilities. But the early peace, the hope, the laughter, the unity, would soon face a test she didn't see coming. A test that would reveal whether Rowan loved her, or loved the version of himself he thought she helped create. The shift in their marriage didn't strike all at once. It crept in quietly, small changes that felt harmless at first. Kaylin didn't think much of them, because that's what happens when you love someone. You give grace, even when it costs you pieces of yourself. It started with Rowan working later than usual. At first, he'd text her updates, running behind. Board meeting went long. Be home soon. Nothing alarming. Kaylin cooked dinner anyway, keeping his plate warm, telling herself that building a life with a man like Rowan meant there would be demanding seasons. She believed it was temporary, just part of his workload increasing as Ellis development expanded across new cities. But temporary stretched into routine. Dinner plates stayed untouched more often than not. Conversations became shorter, lighter, less intimate. Rowan walked in distracted, loosening his tie without meeting her eyes. Kaylin still reached for him. "How was your day? Anything new with the project? Want to talk?" He gave clipped answers, brushing off her attempts to connect as if he were somewhere else entirely, mentally, emotionally, spiritually. Then came the business trips. Rowan started traveling more frequently. New York, Los Angeles, Dallas, Chicago again for meetings that seemed to multiply overnight. Kaylin wanted to support him. She offered encouragement, sent him meals to his hotel room, stayed up late to talk even when she was tired. But each time he returned, he brought less of himself with him. The embraces became shorter. The eye contact became rare. The conversations felt forced. One evening, he rushed through the door with barely a greeting. "You're home early," she had said with a hopeful smile. "Had to beat traffic," he muttered, dropping his bag and heading straight to his office. No kiss, no warmth, no acknowledgement of the woman who stood beside him for 2 years. Kaylin tried not to overthink. She reminded herself that stress could weigh heavily on anyone, especially someone overseeing massive projects. But a part of her chest tightened every time he brushed past her, like she was another task on his list. It was the disappearing affection that hurt the most. The man who once paused everything just to wrap his arms around her now barely noticed when she leaned into him on the couch. The man who once complimented her dresses with a playful grin now didn't lift his head when she entered the room. The man who once promised to share life with her seemed to live in a world she no longer had access to. She tried to talk to him. "Is everything okay? Are we okay? Did I do something wrong?" Each time, he dismissed her gently but firmly. "I'm fine. You're overthinking. Work is just heavy right now." But she could feel the distance growing between them like an invisible wall, one she didn't build and didn't know how to tear down. Then came the scent. a soft floral fragrance on his collar one night when he hugged her distractedly. He didn't wear cologne. He never liked it. Kaylin's stomach twisted, but she forced herself to stay calm. Maybe it's from a coworker. Maybe from someone he brushed past during a meeting. Maybe I'm reading too much into this. She wanted to believe anything except the worst. But the emotional silence only grew thicker. Rowan's eyes became harder to read. His schedule became impossible to predict. His presence felt like a visitor drifting in and out of the home they shared. Kaylin didn't want to assume the worst, but every instinct inside her whispered that something was shifting. Something deeper than work, something heavier than stress. She just didn't know yet that the truth was already sitting in their home, in the form of a woman who wore a bracelet with the initials A.S. The night Kaylin found the bracelet was the night her quiet worries turned into something she could no longer explain away. Rowan had come home from yet another trip, dropping his luggage by the hallway before heading upstairs without more than a distracted greeting. He looked exhausted, but not in the way he used to, not in the "I've worked hard today" way. His exhaustion looked controlled, rehearsed, almost like he was carrying something he didn't want her to see. Kaylin stayed downstairs, cleaning up the living room to clear her thoughts. She tried to brush off the uneasiness pressing against her ribs. She told herself he was just tired, just overwhelmed, just adjusting to a busier schedule. She wanted to believe that, but when she picked up his blazer from the back of the couch to hang it in the closet, something slipped from the pocket and fell onto the floor. A gold bracelet. Sleek, delicate, engraved with 2 letters as. Kaylin stared at it, her breath stuck in her throat. At first, she thought it must have belonged to a colleague, maybe something someone dropped accidentally. But the bracelet didn't look lost. It looked intentionally placed, as if it had been kept, not misplaced. And the initials weren't familiar. She held it gently between her fingers, her heart pounding like it was signaling danger she didn't want to acknowledge. The floral scent she noticed on his collar returned to her memory, matching the faint scent on the bracelet. Her mind raced with questions she didn't want to ask. Who was Az? Why was her bracelet in Rowan's pocket? Why didn't he tell her anything about meeting someone who wore something so distinct? And the hardest question of all, why did this feel like the answer she had been afraid of for weeks? Kaylin sat on the edge of the couch, the bracelet resting in her palm. She stared at it long enough for her stomach to twist in knots. Doubt seeped into her chest, mixing with fear and a quiet kind of heartbreak she wasn't ready to name. She didn't confront him that night, not because she was weak, not because she wanted to avoid the truth, but because confronting him meant acknowledging reality, the reality that something serious had shifted in their marriage. She wanted more evidence, more clarity, more certainty before she spoke words she couldn't take back. So she placed the bracelet on the counter, making note of the initials burned into her mind, and tried to sleep. But sleep didn't come. She turned over thoughts, possibilities, reassurances, excuses, anything to soften the ache forming in her chest. When Rowan came downstairs the next morning and saw the bracelet, his expression flickered, just for a moment, before he smoothed it over. "Oh," he said flatly, picking it up. "One of the team members must have dropped this." He didn't explain further. He didn't elaborate. He didn't look her in the eye. He simply pocketed the bracelet again and walked away. And that moment told Kaylin everything she needed to know. He was hiding something, not a mistake, not a misunderstanding, not an accident, but a truth he hoped she wouldn't pursue. Kaylin didn't push. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to hold on to the idea that her marriage was still salvageable, but the weight of those 2 letters, "Az," stayed with her like a warning she was trying not to hear. She didn't know the woman behind those initials yet, but soon, she would not only meet her, she would find her standing inside her own house. The morning Rowan handed Kaylin the divorce papers began like any other, or at least it pretended to. The sun filtered through the kitchen windows, warming the marble counters she always wiped down after breakfast. The coffee machine hummed softly. Kaylin stood by the stove, stirring eggs the way Rowan liked them, hoping it might bring back a small piece of the man she used to know. She heard his footsteps before she saw him, brisk, heavy, purposeful, not the relaxed walk of the husband who once kissed her cheek every morning. This was the walk of someone carrying a decision. "Morning," she greeted, turning with a hopeful smile. Rowan didn't respond. He didn't even glance at the pan. Instead, he placed a thick stack of papers on the counter, like he was dropping off contracts for her to review. Kalen frowned slightly. "What's that?" His jaw tightened. He didn't ease into the moment, didn't soften his tone, didn't consider her heart. "It's time we go our separate ways," he said. Her grip on the spatula loosened. "What are you talking about?" Rowan exhaled sharply, as if annoyed that she needed clarity. "These are divorce papers." The words hit her harder than any argument they'd ever had. She felt a sudden chill sweep through her body. "Divorce?" she repeated, barely able to breathe. "Rowan, where is this coming from? We haven't talked about anything serious. We haven't—" "It's not something that needs discussion," he interrupted. She stared at him, stunned. "A marriage needs discussion. A divorce definitely does." Rowan leaned on the counter, his face unreadable. "There's someone else." The room seemed to tilt. She placed the spatula down slowly. "Someone else?" she whispered. "Who?" Aubrey Sloan." Kalen's stomach dropped. The initials returned to her mind instantly. The bracelet, the scent, the silence, the shifts in his behavior. "Aubrey?" Her voice trembled. "She's why you've been distant?" He didn't flinch. "She understands me in ways you don't." Kalen blinked hard, fighting the sting behind her eyes. "I've been beside you for years. I supported you through everything. How can you say—" "Kalen," he cut in, raising a hand. "You grounded me. That was good at first, but grounding can feel limiting when a person wants to grow." Her heart cracked. "Limiting? Loving you was never limiting." Rowan's expression stayed cold. "She fits my world better. She fits my life better than you ever did." That sentence shattered something deep inside her. He slid the papers closer, pushing them across the counter like they were nothing more than business forms needing signatures. "I've already arranged everything. I need you to move out within the week." The week, her home, her memories, her marriage, reduced to a deadline. Kalen stepped back, swallowing the ache rising in her throat. "You're throwing away everything we built?" "We didn't build anything I want to keep," he replied, far too calmly. That was the moment Kalen realized the marriage she had been fighting to save wasn't just dying. It had already ended for him long before she knew. She didn't say anything else. She couldn't. The pain was too raw, too sudden, too sharp. She simply turned off the stove, walked past him, and climbed the stairs to pack what she could carry. Her world had shifted in one conversation, and the man she once trusted with her heart had walked away without looking back. Kalen sat on the edge of the bed that afternoon, her suitcase open beside her, and her hands resting motionlessly on her lap. The house felt different now, not because anything changed physically, but because every corner whispered a truth she had been avoiding for months. Rowan wasn't confused. Rowan wasn't overwhelmed. Rowan wasn't slipping away by accident. He had chosen someone else long before he found the courage to admit it. Kalen let her eyes wander across the room. The same room where she and Rowan once talked for hours about plans, dreams, and future kids. The same room where he held her during late-night thunderstorms and whispered to her about fears he never shared publicly. She pressed her lips together, fighting the tremor in her chest. Love didn't disappear overnight. She knew that. She still felt pieces of it tucked inside her, pieces she wished she could rip out so the pain wouldn't be so sharp. But as much as she loved Rowan, she couldn't deny the truth staring at her. Love didn't end, loyalty did. For months, she tried to rationalize the distance. She excused the silence. She forgave the late nights. She dismissed her own instincts in the name of giving him understanding. But understanding meant nothing when the person you're trying to reach isn't reaching back. She folded a shirt slowly, trying to keep her hands steady. The fabric reminded her of a weekend trip they once took to a quiet lakeside rental, where they cooked together and danced barefoot in the living room. Rowan held her close that night, telling her he couldn't imagine a future without her. Yet here she was, packing that future into a small suitcase. Kalen swallowed the ache forming at the back of her throat. Pain wasn't new to her. Life had thrown challenges her way before, but this kind of pain hurt differently. It wasn't just heartbreak. It was betrayal. It was the quiet realization that she had loved someone who dropped her the moment attention from another woman felt more exciting. She thought of the bracelet, the scent on his shirt, the clipped conversations, The cold tone. The way he no longer looked at her like she mattered. She hadn't lost her husband that morning in the kitchen. She lost him the moment he started giving pieces of himself to someone else and pretending she wouldn't notice. Kaylin wiped a tear that escaped despite her best efforts. She didn't want to cry anymore. Not over someone who didn't defend her, value her, or fight for what they built. She zipped her suitcase and stood up. This wasn't the end of her story. It was simply the moment she chose herself, when he failed to choose her. As she walked down the stairs, she felt something shift inside her. Not relief, not closure, but clarity. The kind of clarity that comes when pain strips away illusions. Rowan didn't end their marriage because love faded. He ended it because loyalty, respect, and commitment were things he didn't know how to maintain without applause. Kaylin paused at the door, taking one final glance at the house. The memories here were real. The love she offered was real. But real love cannot survive where loyalty is absent. She stepped outside with her suitcase in hand, the air hitting her face like a reminder that the world beyond these walls still belonged to her. Even if Rowan no longer did, this wasn't her defeat. It was her beginning. Kaylin had always believed that heartbreak would show itself through noise, shouting, arguing, slamming doors, broken things scattered across a floor that once held love. But the real pain came quietly. It arrived through simple moments that felt too heavy for the body to hold and too sharp for the heart to ignore. The first real blow came the afternoon Aubrey walked into the house, not just as Rowan's affair, not just as the woman behind the bracelet, but as the person Rowan now wanted to replace her with. Kaylin had gone back to the house 2 days after Rowan forced the divorce papers into her hands. She wasn't ready emotionally, but the practical things needed attention: clothes, documents, the laptop she kept in her office, sentimental items she didn't want to risk leaving behind. She moved slowly through the foyer, breathing through the sting that pressed deeper the longer she stayed. Standing near the doorway, she tried to hold herself together, even though every inch of the house reminded her of what she once believed her forever would look like. The quiet hum of the refrigerator filled the background. Birds chirped outside the back windows. The light filtered gently across the living room decor she once arranged with thoughtful hands. The home looked the same, but she wasn't the same. She heard the front door open and thought for a moment it might be Rowan returning from the office. She inhaled, preparing to keep her composure. But it wasn't him. Aubrey Sloane stepped inside, as if she had been given the code long before Kaylin realized she would no longer live here. She held a set of keys in her hand, shaking them lightly with the confidence of someone who believed she deserved more than she earned. "Oh, you're still here," Aubrey said, closing the door behind her as casually as someone tossing a bag onto a couch. "I figured you'd already be gone." Kaylin felt a heat rise in her chest, not anger, but something deeper, something that came from being disrespected in the place she once created memories in. "This is my home," Kaylin replied softly, but firmly. "I still live here. Not for long." Aubrey smiled the way someone smiles when they've already rehearsed their victory. "Rowan wants me settled in. There's a lot to do." Kaylin swallowed tightly. "He could have told me you were coming today." Aubrey circled the kitchen island, her heels clicking on the hardwood, her gaze moving over appliances, artwork, and decor with the critique of someone evaluating a property she planned to renovate. "He didn't think it mattered," she said simply. "You're moving out." Kaylin felt her breath catch. This house was our life, our memories, our connection. Aubrey shrugged, flicking her hand. "People outgrow things." A pause hung between them, long enough for both women to feel its weight. Kaylin looked around the kitchen, remembering the day they signed the papers for this house. Rowan had lifted her into his arms, spinning her slowly, telling her he couldn't believe this would be the place they grew old together. She remembered how he admired the natural light in the living room, how he promised they would host family dinners, raise children, and create a place filled with warmth. It felt like another lifetime. Aubrey continued her inspection of the space, touching the counter Kaylin once wiped down every evening, examining the framed art she picked during a trip with her best friend Brielle. "Oh, this will go," Aubrey announced, tapping a canvas with her manicured nail. "I'm thinking something more neutral." "Your style is earthy." Kaylin blinked back, rising emotion. "Those came from local artists. They meant something to us." Aubrey raised an eyebrow, To you, maybe. Kaylin clasped her hands together to keep them from shaking. She wasn't someone who fought through loudness or anger. She fought through steadiness, through keeping her dignity intact. She reminded herself that she wasn't losing value. She was losing someone who didn't appreciate it. Aubrey moved into the living room and paused at the custom-built shelf, holding small tokens of their life together. Books Kaylin collected from independent bookstores, photographs, souvenirs from trips, even a candle they bought at a street market on a spontaneous date night. "This is all going," Aubrey said with an easy wave. "Rowan and I like a cleaner look." Kaylin's heart tightened again. "You and Rowan?" The words felt foreign. "You don't get to plan this house like I never lived here." Aubrey's smile sharpened. "Well, Rowan asked me to make it feel like home. I'm just following his lead." Kaylin stared at her, not in shock anymore, but in understanding. A woman who enters another woman's home with entitlement has no concept of love. She has only conquest. Kaylin inhaled deeply, letting her mind drift into memories tied to the objects Aubrey wanted gone. She remembered the night Rowan kneeling in their backyard with a ring, asking her to marry him under warm patio lights. The way his eyes glowed with hope. The laughter that filled their house on their first Christmas together, while they watched movies wrapped in blankets. The nights they stayed up late eating leftovers from the fridge because they didn't want date night to end. Those memories weren't items. They were pieces of her heart, and Aubrey wanted to erase every one of them. As Aubrey walked through the hallway, Kaylin followed her reluctantly, feeling every memory tug at her. "You don't have to erase everything," Kaylin said quietly. "This isn't just his home. It was ours." Aubrey turned, lifting her chin. "Correction. It was yours. Now it's mine." A slicing quietness settled between them. Kaylin took a step back, grounding herself. She wouldn't let this woman see the tears threatening to fall. Tears were private. Dignity was not. Aubrey strutted into the master bedroom, evaluating the space as if she were shopping. "Oh, I'll definitely redo this entire room. Your taste is so sentimental." Kaylin's gaze dropped for a moment. "This was where we planned our future." Aubrey laughed lightly. "Well, plans change." Kaylin's words were soft, but strong. "Yes, they do." While Aubrey dug through a fabric sample bag she brought with her, as if she had already assumed ownership, Kaylin's mind echoed Rowan's brutal confession. "You softened me too much." She heard it again, fresh and cutting. As if softness was a flaw, as if grounding him was a burden, as if loving him fully was an inconvenience. Aubrey leaned against the dresser with a smirk. "He said you made him feel too settled, too ordinary." Kaylin flinched. "He said that?" "Of course," Aubrey said proudly. "He said you made him feel tied down." Kaylin stood taller. That wasn't a flaw in her character. That was a flaw in his maturity. She didn't break. She didn't lash out. She didn't crumble. She stepped into herself, the woman she was before love, before heartbreak, before betrayal. Her voice steadied. "I hope the comfort you find here is worth the cost." Aubrey crossed her arms. "Oh, it's worth it." Kaylin didn't respond. Sometimes silence is more powerful than any insult. Before she left the room, she paused by the doorframe, letting herself take one last long breath of a space that once held her dreams. She didn't know then that life was preparing her for something she didn't see coming. Something bigger than the house, bigger than Rowan, bigger than betrayal. But she could feel a shift, a stillness that told her this wasn't the end of her story. It was the start of one. Kaylin returned to the house the following morning with one clear intention: pack only what belonged to her and leave before the weight of staying crushed her spirit entirely. She stood at the front door for a long moment, key trembling between her fingers. The house appeared peaceful from the outside, but the silence inside held memories she didn't know how to face. Memories that once wrapped her in security now felt like reminders of everything she lost without warning. She inhaled steady breath and stepped inside. The door clicked behind her, the sound echoing through the foyer. The home felt different today, not cold like it did yesterday when Aubrey walked through, but hollow, as if Rowan's betrayal had emptied something the walls could no longer hold. Kaylin set her tote bag down and walked into the living room. Morning light fell gently across the decor she arranged with care during the early days of their marriage. She stared at the throw pillows, remembering the day they picked them out together, laughing in the store because Rowan insisted on the softest ones he could find. She remembered how he lifted her into his arms when the furniture finally arrived, telling her, "This is us. This is our beginning." Now she was here, packing the pieces of a beginning he no longer wanted. Her hands landed on the picture frames lined on the shelf. She picked one up, a photo from their first Christmas together. They wore matching pajamas, faces bright with joy as they decorated a tree full of ornaments chosen with intention. Her throat tightened. She placed the frame gently in one of the boxes she brought. She didn't want to keep most items, but the memories were part of her story, and she wasn't ashamed of the moments when love was genuine. One by one she collected the sentimental things. A small heart-shaped ceramic bowl made by a local Chicago artist. The candle they bought at a street vendor in Atlanta after accidentally wandering through a block celebration. A handwritten note Rowan left for her on their 6-month anniversary that said, "You soften the world around me." The note hit her harder than she expected. Softness was something he once admired, but now labeled as inconvenient. She folded it gently and placed it inside her bag. As she moved through the room, she kept her steps measured. She refused to let bitterness take over. She wouldn't give Rowan or Aubrey the satisfaction of seeing her defeated. Dignity would be the one thing she left this house with. Untouched, unshaken. She moved upstairs next, entering the master bedroom. Her chest tightened at the sight of the bed, where they once shared long conversations, laughter, and dreams whispered in the dark. The bedding was slightly wrinkled, a sign Rowan slept on his side alone. A part of her felt relief she wasn't there to witness how easily he adjusted to sleeping without her. Kaylin walked to the closet. Her dresses hung neatly where she left them, but the space felt wrong now, too orderly, too untouched, the opposite of the chaos she felt inside. She pulled down 2 suitcases and began folding her clothes slowly, carefully, as if rushing would make the pain worse. Every garment carried a memory. The dress she wore to Rowan's cousin's wedding, the sweater he bought for her during a cold Chicago night, the sundress she wore when they toured this home for the first time. She packed them without lingering too long. A soft knock sounded on the doorframe. Kaylin turned, startled. It was the housekeeper, Mrs. Lowell, a kind woman who worked there since Rowan was a teenager. She held a basket of linens and paused when she saw Kaylin. "Oh, sweetheart," she whispered, her voice heavy with sadness. "I didn't think you'd be here this early." Kaylin forced a small smile. "Just gathering my things." Mrs. Lowell set the basket down and walked closer. She took Kaylin's hands gently. "You deserved better than this," the woman murmured with sincerity only someone who witnessed everything could offer. "You gave him warmth. You gave this home warmth." Kaylin blinked back tears. "Thank you. Really. If you ever need anything," the older woman said, squeezing her hand softly, "I'm here. You're not alone." Hearing that broke something inside her. She hugged the housekeeper tightly, then stepped back, regaining her composure. She couldn't stay long enough to fall apart again. After Mrs. Lowell left, Kaylin packed the last of her clothes, toiletries, and a few treasured items. She zipped the suitcase and stared at it. Everything she owned, everything she could hold on to from this chapter, compressed into 2 bags. Her eyes scanned the bedroom one last time. She whispered, as if to herself, "I loved you." And that love was real. Then she turned off the light and walked out. Downstairs, she gathered her documents, her laptop, and her grandmother's quilt, the one patch of home she brought to her marriage. She folded it gently and held it against her chest for a moment. Its familiar texture felt like a reminder of who she was before the heartbreak. She reached for her purse when she heard the front door unlock. Her chest tightened when Rowan stepped inside. He paused mid-step, seeing the suitcases. His expression shifted, not to guilt, not to regret, but something almost dismissive, as if this entire situation were an inconvenience he wished would resolve itself quietly. "You're leaving today?" he asked. "I'm giving you what you want," she replied softly. "You said a week. I'm leaving early." He looked at her bags, then looked away. "Good. That makes things easier." Kaylin's hands tightened around the strap of her suitcase. She didn't respond. She didn't trust her voice not to quiver. Rowan stepped closer, running a hand through his hair. "I don't want this to be messy, Kaylin. You're making it harder than it needs to be." She stared at him. Harder? Rowan, you broke our vows. You broke us. He didn't look ashamed. He looked inconvenienced. We weren't working anymore, he said flatly. Aubrey and I, we connect differently. Kaylin felt her heart bruise all over again, but she held her spine straight. You chose attention over love. Just call it what it is. Rowan's jaw tightened, but he didn't argue. He had nothing left to defend. Kaylin lifted her suitcase. Goodbye, Rowan. Goodbye, he replied, already turning away. Kaylin walked out before her resolve crumbled. She didn't look back, not even once. The door closed behind her with a finality that felt both painful and necessary. Outside, the cold air brushed her cheeks, and she took her first unsteady breath of freedom. This wasn't the ending she wanted, but she refused to let it be the end of her. After a deep breath, she loaded her luggage into her car and headed straight to the one place where she knew safety still lived. Brielle opened the door before Kaylin even knocked twice. Her cousin took one look at her tear-soaked face and pulled her into the tightest embrace she had felt in months. "Oh my God, Kay." Come in, Brielle whispered, rubbing her back. "You're safe now. You're safe here." Kaylin broke. Not loudly, not dramatically, but the kind of break that comes when a woman stops pretending she's fine. She sobbed into Brielle's shoulder, clutching her cousin as if holding on to the last thread of stability she had left. Brielle guided her to the couch, wrapped her in a soft blanket, and handed her tissues. "Talk whenever you're ready. Or don't. Just breathe for now." Kaylin wiped her cheeks. "I can't believe he did this to me." "I can," Brielle replied honestly. "Not because you deserved it, but because he didn't deserve you." Kaylin leaned her head back, eyes swollen. "I feel so stupid. I feel like I failed." Brielle turned toward her, voice steady and strong. "You didn't fail. He failed you. There's a difference." Kaylin shook her head slowly. "I gave that man everything. I thought I was enough." "You were enough," Brielle said firmly. "He just didn't know what to do with a woman who loved him without conditions." Kaylin let the words sink in. For the first time since the heartbreak began, she didn't fight them. She let them land exactly where they were meant to, on the part of her heart that needed to remember her value. The days that followed were heavy. Grief didn't come in waves. It sat with her, quiet but unrelenting. She cried when Brielle made breakfast. She cried while folding laundry. She cried while trying to watch TV, realizing nothing distracted her from the ache. Shame hovered around her too, not because she did something wrong, but because she had trusted someone who let her down so completely. At night, Kaylin lay awake listening to the soft hum of Atlanta traffic outside Brielle's window. She clutched her grandmother's quilt, letting it remind her of childhood, resilience, and the warmth of a life she once understood. Slowly, she began to rediscover herself, not through forced optimism, not through pretending she was okay, but through truth, through acknowledging the hurt, through accepting that her heart was wounded, through understanding that she wasn't broken, just bruised, and bruises heal. Kaylin journaled one night, writing words she didn't yet believe but needed to say. "My worth isn't tied to the people who fail me. Love should lift, not diminish. Losing someone who doesn't value you isn't a loss." Her hand trembled as she wrote, but each sentence stitched a small piece of strength back into her. Brielle peeked into the room. "You okay?" Kaylin exhaled. "I will be," and she meant it, not as forced hope, but as a small truth forming inside her. She didn't fail. She didn't fall short. She didn't lose value. She simply loved someone incapable of appreciating the depth of her heart. The first week in Brielle's apartment felt like walking through thick fog. Kaylin woke up each morning on the pull-out couch of her cousin's small Atlanta place, staring at the ceiling, trying to remember when her life stopped feeling like her own. The quilt from her grandmother was the only constant. She slept wrapped in it, clutching the edges like a lifeline. Brielle, on the other hand, moved through the tiny apartment like a storm of determined kindness. The second morning, she stood over Kaylin with a mug of coffee. "Drink," Brielle said. "We're not starting your new life on an empty stomach." Kaylin managed a weak smile, pushing herself upright. "I'm not ready to be new yet." "That's fine," Brielle replied. "You can be hurt and healing at the same time, but you're not staying stuck." She meant it. Brielle worked as a creative director for a small media agency that specialized in campaigns for Black-owned businesses in Atlanta. Her world was color, movement, music, and community, and she was determined to pull Kaylin into it, one step at a time. The first night, Brielle made her favorite meal: fried chicken, mac and cheese, collard greens, and cornbread. The whole apartment filled with warmth and seasoning, making Kaylin's chest ache with familiarity. "Smell that?" Brielle said, stirring the pot. "That's love on a stove." Kaylin sat at the small dining table, wiping her face with the back of her hand. "It smells like home." "That's the point," Brielle replied. "You didn't lose home, Kay. You just lost an address." On Friday, Brielle took it a step further. "I know you want to stay inside," she said, dropping onto the couch beside her, "but you're coming with me tonight." "No arguments." Kaylin frowned. Nope," Brielle cut in. "There's a live band at this little spot on Edgewood. They're doing a neo-soul night. You don't have to dress up. You don't have to talk to anyone. Just sit there with me and remember that music still exists." Kaylin hesitated, then sighed. "What if I cry in the middle of it?" "Then you cry." Brielle said, "You're allowed to, but you won't cry alone." That night, they stepped into a cozy bar filled with warm lighting, the soft hum of conversation, and live instruments tuning in the corner. People of different ages and backgrounds filled the room, laughing, swaying, catching up after long weeks. The energy was gentle but lively. Kaylin took a seat at their small table near the back, her shoulders tense at first. Brielle ordered them mocktails and a plate of wings. When the band began to play, smooth bass, gentle keys, a voice that carried soul and hurt and hope all at once, Kaylin felt something loosen inside her. The lyrics spoke about heartbreak and moving on, about being undervalued and choosing yourself. Every line pressed gently against wounds she wasn't ready to show, but couldn't hide from anymore. "You okay?" Brielle asked over the music. Kaylin nodded, even as her eyes filled. "I forgot what it feels like to enjoy something that isn't tied to him." "That's why we're here," Brielle said. "You were a whole person before Rowan. You're still a whole person now." By the second set, Kaylin found herself clapping along with the crowd. She even let out a small laugh when the singer cracked a joke between songs. It wasn't much, but it was something. Over the next several days, Brielle kept gently pulling her into life. Saturday morning, she took Kaylin to a local Black-owned bookstore. The owner recognized Brielle, greeting her with a hug. "And who's this beauty?" he asked, smiling at Kaylin. "This is my cousin, Kaylin," Brielle said proudly. "She's brilliant, tech-savvy, and temporarily heartbroken. So we're filling her brain with stories instead of stress." The owner chuckled. "You're in the right place then." He recommended books about healing, identity, and Black women thriving in difficult spaces. Kaylin slid her fingers across the covers, feeling inspired and intimidated all at once. "You don't have to fix everything today," Brielle told her. "Just let yourself be fed by something that isn't pain." On Sunday, they streamed her mom's church service online. Kaylin's mother texted her during the sermon, "Baby, I love you. This is not your end. God still has something for you." Kaylin cried quietly on the couch, Brielle rubbing her back while passing her tissues. "Let it out," Brielle whispered. "That's how your heart makes room for new things." Slowly, through food, music, spaces filled with Black joy, and soft ordinary moments, Brielle started reintroducing Kaylin to herself, not as Rowan's wife, not as the woman who got left, but as Kaylin Pierce, the girl from Chicago who loved community, who believed in equity, who brought light into rooms long before anyone ever put a ring on her finger. She wasn't happy yet, but for the first time since everything broke, she felt something that wasn't numbness, possibility. A week later, Brielle walked into the living room with her laptop open and a familiar gleam in her eyes. "Okay," she declared, dropping onto the arm of the couch. "I found something, and you cannot say no." Kaylin narrowed her eyes. "That's not encouraging." "There's a community center on the south side," Brielle explained. "They run a tech club for middle and high school students, but the woman who normally leads the program just moved. They're looking for a volunteer who knows tech and cares about the kids." Kaylin's chest fluttered. That sounds like a lot, she whispered. That sounds like you, Brielle corrected. You light up when you talk about tech and access. Every time you tell me about the programs you built back in Chicago, your whole face changes. Kaylin bit her lip. I don't know if I'm ready to be needed right now. Brielle softened. Kay, you were built to pour into people. That's who you are. But this time, you're not doing it to hold a man together. You're doing it for kids who actually benefit from your heart. That distinction landed deep. Brielle sent an email on Kaylin's behalf, with Kaylin sitting right beside her to approve every word. Within 2 days, the director of the center, Ms. Turner, responded with enthusiasm and asked if Kaylin could stop by for a visit. The morning of the visit, Kaylin almost backed out. She sat on the edge of the bed in Brielle's small guest space, staring at her simple, professional outfit. What if I can't be myself yet? She asked. You don't have to be your full self, Brielle said from the doorway. Just bring the part of you that cares. That's more than enough. So Kaylin went. The community center was set in a modest brick building with murals on the outside walls. Young black kids in cap and gowns, fists raised, books and laptops drawn in vibrant colors. Inside, the lobby smelled like cleaning supplies and crayons, with kids' voices echoing from down the hall. Ms. Turner, a woman in her late 40s with kind eyes and a powerful presence, greeted her with a warm hug instead of a handshake. You must be Kaylin, she said. Brielle talks about you like you're some kind of superhero. Kaylin laughed softly. I promise I'm very regular. Ms. Turner shook her head. If you're willing to give your time and skills to these kids, you're anything but regular. She walked Kaylin down the hall to the computer room. A handful of desktops lined the walls, some older, some slightly newer, a few in desperate need of repair. We run coding basics, robotics, and digital literacy, Ms. Turner explained. But we've been improvising since our last instructor left. The kids are hungry to learn, though. From the doorway, a group of middle schoolers peeked in. When they spotted Kaylin, one of the girls whispered loudly, Is that her? Ms. Turner called them in. Come say hi, y'all. This is Ms. Kaylin. A shy boy in a hoodie stepped forward. Are you really a tech person? Kaylin smiled gently. I am. I build programs that make systems work better for people who usually don't get access. That sounds cool, another girl said. Do you know how to make games? I do, Kaylin replied, a small spark lighting in her chest as she spoke. And if I'm here long enough, I can teach you how to build yours. Their eyes widened. Excitement buzzed through the room. In that instant, something clicked back into place inside Kaylin, a part of her identity she hadn't lost, even if heartbreak had made her forget it for a while. She spent the next hour observing their current lesson, asking questions, tossing out small suggestions. The kids were curious and blunt in the way young people often are. Do you have a husband? One boy asked suddenly. Kaylin hesitated for a moment. No, she answered softly. Not anymore. Good, a girl muttered. Men be stressing people out. The room broke into laughter. Even Kaylin smiled, the sound bubbling up from a place that hadn't felt joy in too long. By the end of the visit, Ms. Turner asked, So, can we count on you? Kaylin looked at the kids, their hopeful faces turned toward her. Her instinct wanted to pull back, to protect herself from any more responsibility, but her heart moved forward. Yes, she said, once or twice a week to start. Let's build something solid. Walking out of the center, she felt lighter than she had in weeks. That evening, sitting at Brielle's kitchen table, she pulled out her notebook and began sketching out lesson plans, basic coding concepts, real-world examples, career paths in tech, beyond what kids usually hear. She poured herself into it quietly, not to distract from pain, but to use it. Her heartbreak hadn't stolen her ability to create. It had simply forced her to redirect where she poured her energy. This time, it wouldn't be into a man who saw her as an accessory. It would be into kids who saw her as a path. Healing didn't arrive in a straight line. Some days, Kaylin felt strong. Other days, she felt like her chest might cave in if someone even said Rowan's name. One Monday afternoon, after a successful class at the community center where two kids built their very first functioning apps, Kaylin left feeling proud. She walked outside into the Atlanta sun, smiling as she replayed the kid's excitement in her mind. But that evening, when she scrolled through her email, she stumbled on a newsletter featuring Ellis Development's latest project in Chicago. The headline read, "Ellis Development hosts gala with new partner, socialite Aubrey Sloan." Her stomach twisted. There they were in the attached photo, Rowan in a sharp tux, Aubrey in a gown, smiling for cameras. The same cameras that once captured Kaylin at his side. Brielle walked in to find her staring at the screen. "What happened?" Brielle asked, already sensing the shift. Kaylin turned the laptop slightly. "They look happy." Brielle sighed. "They look expensive. That's not the same thing." Kaylin closed the laptop slowly. "Why does it still hurt this much?" "Because you're human," Brielle said, sitting beside her. "You loved him. You built with him. You don't just flip that off like a switch." That night, Kaylin cried quietly again, not because she wanted him back, but because she had to mourn the version of him she thought existed. A few days later, the pain eased when one of her students, a girl named Jada, ran up to her after class. "Ms. Kaylin," she said, out of breath, "I showed my mom the project we did. She said she's proud of me. She never said that about school before." Kaylin felt tears threaten again, but this time for a different reason. "Jada, that's amazing," she replied, kneeling to her level. "You should be proud too. You're doing real work." Jada smiled shyly. "I like learning from you. You make it feel possible." That word landed gently in Kaylin's heart. Possible. Her days became a mix of high and low moments. Highs. Kids excitedly calling her name when she entered the computer room. Ms. Turner pulling her aside to say parents had noticed a change in their children's confidence. Brielle throwing movie therapy nights, with silly rom-coms and blankets piled on the couch. Lows. Waking up from dreams where she was still in the Lake Michigan house, only to remember she no longer lived there. Accidentally passing a commercial property sign in Atlanta with the Ellis logo during a drive. Moments when her chest tightened for no clear reason, just from the memory of how deeply she once trusted Rowan. At times, she questioned whether she was really moving forward. But each time she walked into the community center and saw a room full of kids ready to learn. Each time Brielle refused to let her retreat into isolation. Each time her mother checked on her and reminded her that heartbreak doesn't cancel destiny. A truth grew stronger inside her. Rowan walked away from her life. But she had not walked away from herself. She was still Kaylin. She still had a calling. She still had love to give, just nowhere near the man who didn't value it. And slowly, in the middle of that messy, uneven process, she began to believe she would be okay. Not instantly, not perfectly, but truly. A few weeks after Kaylin began volunteering, Brielle convinced her to attend a local networking mixer for Black professionals in Atlanta. The event was hosted at a renovated warehouse turned event space. Warm lighting, exposed brick, a DJ spinning soft R&B tracks, and community leaders scattered across the room discussing business, art, and opportunities. Kaylin walked in feeling unsure. Her confidence was still rebuilding itself, piece by piece, and large rooms full of strangers had never been her comfort zone. She clutched her small purse, reminding herself she didn't need to impress anyone tonight. She was only here because Brielle insisted it would be good for her. "Just mingle a little," Brielle whispered, nudging her gently. "Nothing stressful, nothing deep. Just be present." Kaylin nodded, offering a tiny smile. She drifted toward a display table for a local nonprofit focused on digital inclusion. She picked up an informational card, reading the details carefully. Anything involving community tech work always caught her attention. A familiar voice came from behind her. "Didn't expect to see you here." Kaylin froze for half a second before turning around. Declan Ward stood a few feet away, holding a drink, his expression soft with surprise. Clean cut, dressed in a simple blazer and jeans, he looked approachable. The same gentle energy she remembered from the few times they'd interacted during her marriage. He had been one of Rowan's business consultants years ago. Smart, observant, quiet. A man who didn't force conversation, but always carried depth behind his eyes. "Declan?" Kaylin whispered. "Wow." "Hi," he smiled slowly. "Hey, Kaylin. It's good to see you." She hadn't seen him since before Rowan shifted into the version of himself she barely recognized. Declan had stepped back from the Ellis projects long before the divorce, and she hadn't known why. "I didn't know you still lived in Atlanta," she said. "Moved back 2 years ago," he replied. "Consulting feels more meaningful here. Less performance-based." The word hit her chest in a way she didn't expect. "What about you?" he asked gently. "How have you been?" Callan hesitated. She didn't want to dump her heartbreak onto him, nor did she want to pretend everything was perfect. "I'm finding my way," she said truthfully. Declan nodded, as if he understood more than she said aloud. "You look tired," he said carefully. Not as judgment, but concern. Not worn out. Just carrying a lot. Callan exhaled softly. "It's been a challenging few months." He didn't pry. He didn't push. He just nodded again, acknowledging her without asking for details she wasn't ready to share. "You being here means you're trying," Declan said. "That's already something." And, for the first time that night, Callan felt a small lift inside her. Not joy, not excitement, but relief. Relief that someone saw her without asking her to explain herself. Declan guided her toward a quieter corner of the event, where a small catering station served fruit cups and miniature sandwiches. "Hungry?" he asked. "A little." "Good," he said. "Let's eat before someone traps us in a 30-minute conversation about business strategies." Callan laughed softly, genuinely, and followed him. They filled small plates with fruit and sat at a high-top table near the back of the venue. Declan didn't bombard her with questions. Instead, he asked about her volunteering at the community center. "I heard you've been working with kids again," he said. "Ms. Turner mentioned a new instructor who's been getting great feedback." Callan blinked. "Wait, you know Ms. Turner?" Declan nodded. "She's one of my clients. I help her with funding proposals for expansion." Callan let out a small breath. "She's incredible. The kids adore her." "They adore you too," he replied, then added gently, "I can tell. You brighten when you talk about them." Her cheeks warmed. She hadn't expected anyone to notice. Declan continued, "It makes sense, you know. You always had this ability to make a space feel hopeful." Callan swallowed. "I don't know if I feel hopeful yet." "That's okay," he said. "Hope isn't loud. Sometimes it's quiet at first." She studied him for a moment. He wasn't saying anything romantic or intense. His tone was calm, slow, almost careful, as if he knew she was fragile and didn't want to cause a single crack. "Can I ask something?" She said, "Sure. Why did you stop working with Rowan?" Declan leaned back, exhaling with a quiet sigh. "We didn't align anymore. The direction he started taking didn't feel healthy." Callan nodded slowly. She didn't ask further. She didn't need to. Declan switched the topic. "What about you?" he asked softly. "What do you need right now?" The question startled her. No one had asked her that since the divorce. Callan looked down. "I don't know." "That's fair," he replied. "When life collapses, you don't rebuild in one day. You start with something small, something steady." "Like the community center?" she asked. "Exactly," he said. "Something that reminds you you're still valuable." His tone was reassuring without pressure. He didn't act like a man trying to step into her vulnerability. He acted like someone who respected it. "Declan," she said quietly, "thank you. Really, I didn't expect to feel comfortable tonight." He smiled again. "You don't owe me comfort, Callan. I'm just glad you're not carrying everything alone right now." Her throat tightened, not painfully, but gratefully. After a while, the DJ lowered the music, and small groups formed across the room. Callan and Declan stayed by their table, talking about harmless topics. Technology trends, community programs, childhood stories. She laughed more in 2 hours than she had in 2 months. But eventually, the conversation drifted gently toward Rowan, not by Callan's intention, but through something Declan said while discussing workplace culture. "You know," he said thoughtfully, "people don't always change because they want to. Sometimes they change to impress the wrong crowd." Callan looked at him slowly. Declan continued, "Rowan used to be grounded when he worked with us. Transparent, curious. But over time, he started caring more about how he looked than who he was." Kalen remained quiet, letting his words settle. Declan wasn't attacking Rowan. He wasn't gossiping. He was explaining a truth he had seen long before she recognized it. He built this image he thought he needed, Declan said, but the cost was becoming someone he didn't recognize, and someone other people couldn't recognize either. Kalen felt her chest tighten, not from pain but from understanding. He pushed you away, Declan added softly, not because you lacked anything, but because you reminded him of the real version of himself. The version he was afraid wasn't enough for the world he wanted to impress. Kalen blinked, stunned. I never wanted him to be anything except who he was. I know, Declan said quietly, but he didn't choose who he was. He chose who he wanted people to think he was, and that choice came with losses. Me? Kalen whispered. Declan nodded once. Yes, but then he leaned closer, not physically, but emotionally. But you didn't lose anything by being yourself, he said. You lost someone who didn't appreciate your strength. That's not your failure. A slow, steady breath left Kalen's lips. For the first time since the divorce, she didn't feel like a discarded woman. She felt like a woman whose worth Rowan couldn't rise to meet. Declan watched her with quiet understanding. You're rebuilding, Kalen. I can see it already. Maybe you can't see it yet, but I can. Her eyes softened. Do you really think so? I don't think so, he replied. I'm certain. A warmth spread through her chest, not romantic, not rushed, not overwhelming, just healing, the kind of warmth that reminded her she was still standing, still valuable, still alive. When the event ended, Declan walked her to the exit. If you ever need to talk, he said gently, just reach out, no pressure. She nodded. Thank you, Declan, truly. As she stepped into Brielle's car outside, Kalen realized something profound. Rowan hadn't been the foundation of her life. Her own heart had always been the foundation, and it was learning how to beat again. She was not the woman who left her home defeated. She was becoming the woman who would rebuild from ashes, not because someone saved her, but because someone reminded her she still had something worth rising into. At first, Rowan told himself the tension in the house was just an adjustment period. He tried to look at everything with the same confident lens he used in business, new investment, new life. That was how he framed Aubrey, and the changes that came with her. He convinced himself the chaos was temporary. But the more time passed, the more he realized this wasn't temporary. This was who she really was. The first shift showed up in small domestic decisions. The living room needs a complete upgrade, Aubrey said one afternoon, flipping through an interior design catalog at the kitchen island. All this personal touch stuff is dragging the mood down. She had already started removing the items Kalen left behind that weren't sentimental enough to box up. The soft blankets, the framed art from local artists, the books on community development and technology, all gone. In their place appeared glossy coffee table books, abstract decor pieces, and oversized vases chosen purely for aesthetics. Rowan walked in from a conference call and paused at the sight of a few workers hauling out an entire shelf. What are you doing? He asked. Upgrading, Aubrey said brightly. We can't host movers and shakers in a room that looks like a cozy lesson on community outreach. Rowan's brows pulled together. That shelf was custom built. Aubrey didn't look up from her catalog. Exactly. That's the problem. Custom for a life you're not living anymore. He let it go. He told himself this was part of moving forward, of embracing a new phase. But day by day, the home became less of a sanctuary and more of a showroom. Furniture changed. Colors changed. The entire mood of the space shifted away from warmth towards something sharper. Then, the spending began to escalate. Luxury shopping bags started piling up in the bedroom. Boxes of designer shoes, handbags, jewelry, and clothes arrived almost daily. Aubrey enrolled them in exclusive memberships, private dining clubs, and social circles that revolved entirely around status. You spent $20,000 in 2 weeks, Rowan said one evening, studying the credit card statement. Aubrey smiled, sliding onto his lap as if that would erase the numbers. You're a Ellis. People expect a certain standard. We're not regular. This is excessive, he muttered. It's alignment, she corrected. If you want to keep your influence strong, You have to look like you live the life you sell. Her reasoning came with a hint of manipulation that Rowan didn't yet want to name. She began hosting gatherings almost every weekend. The house that once held small, intimate dinners now echoed with loud parties. Guests he'd never met before wandered freely through the rooms, drinks in hand, taking photos of themselves in the remodeled living area. Rowan watched from the edge of the events, nursing a drink and forcing smiles as people complimented his upgrade. Kaylin was nice, one man said with a shrug at a cocktail mixer, but she didn't fit this environment. Aubrey gets it. Rowan's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. He heard that sentiment more than once, phrased differently by different people. She's great for your brand. She looks like she belongs in your world. She's the kind of woman people expect at your side in the media. Aubrey overheard these comments and soaked them in. She wasn't just living in his house. She was building her image off his name. She dropped his last name in every conversation. She tagged his company in social media posts that didn't involve work. She told her friends, "We're expanding in some exciting ways," as if she were part of the decision-making. The disrespect started surfacing in the way she spoke about his past. "Don't talk about the old setup," she said once, when he mentioned the way Kaylin used to organize the kitchen. "It makes you sound sentimental." He bristled. "There's nothing wrong with remembering. You're a leader, baby," she said, draping her arms around his shoulders. Leaders move forward. They don't hang on to memories that make them look soft. Soft, that word, once a comfort when tied to Kaylin, now sounded like an insult when Aubrey used it. He ignored the discomfort as long as he could. He told himself this was the life he'd chosen. A woman who fit in at galas, whose friends were plugged into the same social circuits, who could charm anyone in a room with practiced ease. But each day, it felt less like a partnership and more like he had signed a contract he didn't fully read. It didn't take long for the turbulence inside the house to leak into his professional world. The first sign was subtle. His finance team requested a meeting about personal and corporate spending. "We've noticed an increase in expenditures tied to your personal accounts," his CFO said carefully, sliding a report across the table. "A lot of this overlaps with events that involve business contacts, but the lines are getting blurred." Rowan glanced at the numbers. Lavish restaurant tabs, private club charges, designer purchases logged as client entertaining. He recognized the dates. Most of them matched nights. Aubrey insisted their presence was good for the company's exposure. "Is this a problem?" he asked, defensive, without meaning to be. "It could become one," the CFO admitted. "If investors start asking questions, we want to make sure everything is clean." He nodded, promising to watch it more closely. But he didn't confront Aubrey immediately. He knew how that conversation would go. "You're worried about a few receipts," she would say, laughing it off. "Do you want to look like you're penny pinching while your competitors invest in their image?" At first, he kept quiet. He tried to cut back logically, skipping one event here, declining another invitation there, but Aubrey resisted every slowdown. "We need to be seen," she insisted one night as she adjusted one of her dresses in the mirror. "If you're not present, people forget you, and then someone else takes your place." He couldn't deny that image mattered in his industry. It always had, but something about the intensity with which she clung to that concept unsettled him. Soon, the whispers started. At a real estate conference, a longtime associate pulled him aside. "Everything okay back home?" the man asked, voice low. Rowan frowned. "What do you mean?" "Well," the associate said, choosing his words, "people talk. They've noticed you've been stretching yourself thin. New partner, new lifestyle, new expenses. They're wondering if your priorities shifted." "Business is fine," Rowan replied sharply. "I didn't say it wasn't," the man said gently. "Just be careful. Your reputation has always been about being solid. You don't want that to change." The comment stayed with him. A few days later, a board member requested a private conversation. "Some of us are concerned," she said, tapping a polished nail against her tablet. "Your personal life is bleeding into company perception. These parties, these posts, these new connections, they may not be working in your favor." "Those are exaggerated," he argued. "Are they?" she asked calmly. "There's talk that you're letting your new relationship guide business decisions." that you're more focused on keeping up with a flashy lifestyle than maintaining steady leadership. Rowan felt his stomach churn. That's not who I am. Then make sure your actions keep matching the man we believed in, she replied. On the surface, he kept his posture straight, his tone controlled, his responses measured. But inside, a storm was starting. He began to notice the dissonance everywhere. The house felt less like a home and more like a stage. His calendar was filled with events that looked impressive but accomplished little. Conversations that used to center on strategy now revolved around optics. One night, after a particularly draining board meeting, he came home earlier than expected. The house was lit, music pulsing from the living room speakers. He heard laughter, not his, not belonging to anyone he recognized. He set his keys down and followed the sound. Aubrey was in the living area with two women he'd met once at an event. Empty wine glasses sat on the coffee table, designer shopping bags scattered around them. They were mid-conversation, the kind of conversation people only have when they don't think they're being heard. I told you, Aubrey was saying, her tone smug. You just have to find a man who needs to feel important, stroke his ego, act like his world is the only one that matters, and he'll sign anything. The other women laughed. Rowan's chest tightened. Come on, one of them said. You make it sound too simple. It is simple, Aubrey insisted. You should have seen him when we started. He was bored, comfortable, married to a woman who made him feel calm instead of powerful. I gave him a rush he didn't even know he was missing. Rowan felt a chill. He bought you a whole house, the second woman said. That alone is impressive. Please, Aubrey replied with a scoff. That house is just the beginning. Once I make sure everything legally favors us, I can maneuver anything I want. The words hit him like a blow. Maneuver, favor us. Simple. He stood there, hidden behind the corner, his heart pounding against his ribs. They say he's so smart, Aubrey continued, but at the end of the day, he's like any other man who grew up needing approval. You figure out his weak spot, you play to it, and you own him. His breath caught. Owned. He stepped back before she noticed him, his head swimming with disbelief and clarity crashing together. The pieces clicked into place, the way she pushed him toward a more extravagant life, the way she framed every concern as an attack on his status, the way she positioned herself as the reason his brand looked strong. It wasn't partnership. It was strategy, and he was the asset. He didn't confront her that night. He couldn't, not yet. Instead, Rowan walked quietly to his home office, closed the door, and stood in the dark, letting the words replay in his mind. He was bored, comfortable, married to a woman who made him feel calm instead of powerful. You figure out his weak spot, and you own him. He sank into his leather chair, resting his elbows on his knees, pressing his hands into his face. How did I get here? He whispered to no one. The man who once prided himself on making sharp decisions had been played. He'd let someone use his insecurities as leverage, and he had willingly handed over the life he built with a woman who had never manipulated him. Not once. He thought of Kaylin, of how she greeted him after long days with patience, not demands, of how she challenged him, but never belittled him, of the way she believed in his ability to use his power for good, not for spectacle. Back then, coming home felt like stepping away from noise. Now, the house roared with noise, even when it was quiet. Later that night, when the guests left, and Aubrey finally retreated upstairs, Rowan stayed downstairs alone. He walked into the living room and looked at it properly for the first time since she renovated it. The color scheme was sleek and cold. The art was expensive and empty. There was no trace of the life he used to know. No quilt, no photo collages, no hint of the community-centered heart Kaylin brought with her. He crossed the room slowly, his eyes landing on a spot above the fireplace. There used to be a framed photo there. The shot from their first anniversary by Lake Michigan. The same one Aubrey promised to take down later. It was gone, replaced by a piece of abstract artwork that meant nothing to him. His chest tightened with an ache he hadn't allowed himself to feel until now. He suddenly remembered the sound of Kaylin's laughter echoing through the house, the smell of her cooking on Sunday afternoons when she tried new recipes, the way she sat on the couch, laptop open, working on proposals to bring tech opportunities to youth who had never imagined themselves in that world. He closed his eyes. I traded her for this? He murmured. He thought of the way he'd spoken to her in the kitchen. She fits my life better than you ever did. We didn't build anything I want to keep. The shame of those words burned hotter than anything he'd felt in years. Regret didn't creep in gently. It slammed into him. His throat tightened. His eyes stung. He fought the urge to dismiss his emotion the way he'd been conditioned his entire life. But he was too tired to numb himself now. He sat on the edge of the couch and dropped his head into his hands. He saw Kaylin's face in his mind, the hurt in her eyes when he told her he wanted a divorce. The way she didn't scream, didn't beg, just looked at him with a quiet, broken disbelief. What did I do? He whispered. He stayed there for a long time, the room growing darker as the night deepened. The house, once filled with warmth, now felt like a cold museum dedicated to poor choices. Every untouched surface, every carefully styled object, every curated piece of decor reminded him that he wasn't living in a home anymore. He was living in evidence, evidence of betrayal, evidence of weakness, evidence of a man who chose ego over love, image over integrity. He couldn't sleep that night. He tossed and turned, replaying scenes from his marriage in relentless detail. The first time Kaylin showed him the plans for her tech program, and he told her, "You're going to change lives." The night they stayed up late, eating leftovers, and planning a trip they never took. The way she used to curl up next to him during storms, trusting him enough to rest. He had taken all of that and discarded it for someone who openly viewed him as a transaction. The floor under his feet no longer felt steady. For the first time, Rowan wondered if he had not only lost Kaylin. He wondered if he had lost himself. And in that quiet, dark house, full of things he never actually wanted, one harsh realization settled over him like a weight. He didn't just break her life. He broke his own. Healing did not rush itself into Kaylin's life. It moved slowly, the way sunlight crawls through blinds in the early morning. Quiet, steady, unforced. And as she continued volunteering at the community center, something